Hello, welcome to, I believe it is day 4. Welcome to day four. So one of your quick assignments yesterday, or short or brief assignments yesterday, was to look up primary and secondary sources. So I did a Google search and I found here the University of New South Wales in Sydney um, for the library that defines primary sources provide a first-hand account of an event or time period or are considered to be authoritative. They represent original thinking, reports on discoveries or events, or they can share new information. Often these sources are created at the time the events occurred, but they can also include sources that are created later. So what does it mean in music? So you submitted some examples to me as well. But very often, if we deal with a piece of music, then of course the original handwriting of the score is a primary source. Now, also the first recording can be a primary source if the research focuses on recordings. Or the history of recordings, but it depends on the perspective of the research project. Sometimes we do biographical research, and so letters of the composer that the composer wrote or somebody else wrote to the composer may be primary sources for that kind of research. But in the absence of those, perhaps publications in newspapers. So a newspaper article can be a primary source as long as basically that's as primary as it can get, as we can get it. That means as far back to the original person or object of our research. So it depends on what the focus of the research is. We always want to try to include some kind of primary sources. If we were to do some research on educational approaches, then perhaps a survey or the survey results would be the primary source of a research. Or perhaps even a lesson plan. So it depends on what the focus of the research is. Anyways, it says secondary sources involve analysis, synthesis, interpretation, or evaluation of primary sources. They often attempt to describe or explain primary sources. So generally speaking, secondary sources are what we have been looking for in those databases such as RILM, or in catalogs such as our library catalog or WorldCat. And there are other databases that I will introduce you to very soon, where we will also look for secondary sources. So if you have a book on a topic, if you have an article that's published in a journal or a chapter in a book, those are most of the time a secondary source. Tertiary sources, some scholars don't consider them. Other scholars say tertiary sources can be basically a synthesis of secondary sources, such as in a textbook. If we have a music history textbook, the Grout, for example, I don't know if you used it during undergraduate studies, but that can be considered as a tertiary source. Anyways, here are examples, but they're not music specific. So I just wanted to review that. I also want to review searching in those databases. So first of all, searching in a WorldCat. So I will go to databases, scroll down to W, WorldCat. I will use the version on first search. Don't use the public version. It is not as good. Although if later that is the only version you have access to, that might be as good as it gets, but for now the first search version. So if we if we look for a secondary source on, let's say, teaching approaches, music, singing in elementary school, okay, something pedagogical. So let me. So we are now in WorldCat. That means that all of these items are self-contained items. There are books. Um, here's a very famous one, Korai Today. This is the second edition. I believe that is still the latest edition, perhaps. Um, but the most important thing, I know this book, so I knew it is a book. But the most important thing, if we look at a record in any kind of database, be it WorldCat, be it RILM, be it in any of the other databases that I will introduce you to soon, we need to know what type of record, what type of document this is. So if you scroll down in WorldCat and see here material type, no, document type. Except, so I'm a little bit confused here right now, and it's perfectly fine. It says internet source or computer file. It's because it actually is a link to this as an ebook. That's why. But it is also published as a print book. So if it's the print book, then the same book will have a separate entry in WorldCat. And that's why it is so important to know what document type you're looking at. So I'm redoing the search and I'm just pasting in the title of the book, Korea Today, and I say it's a title. Now, sometimes it doesn't find it, and sometimes the reason is between the main title of the book, like Korai Today, and the colon is a space, and we need to sometimes get rid of the space. Let's see if this actually worked. Yes, it did. So if you don't find a search result, doesn't mean that there is none. It means there may be a problem with the search, and even just a little space can be a problem. So here, this is actually the link to an ebook. This first one here. The second one is also an electronic internet source document type, because it goes to eBrary. So the same material, first of all, can exist in different formats, and that means that in a library catalog they would have separate entries. So in WorldCat they have separate entries too. But here it is listed both as a book and an internet source, document type, book, and internet source. This really is the actual print book, and why they included here internet sources, because they also have links to the tables of contents, or to the table of contents, which is online. So it is very important to see what document type it is. So always scroll to where it says document type and look at what it is that you are looking at. And if you want to list this item in a bibliography, then you can look up under APA or Chicago and look up how do I list books, just to remind you on how to do this. So if I were to go to RILM, again, I go from the library homepage to databases, and I go to music, and I scroll down to RILM Abstracts of Music Literature. Again, this is now an index of secondary literature. Some may have a link to the full text to the actual article, but the idea of this database is that it complements a library catalog. That means, or it complements WorldCat. WorldCat are the self-contained items, but it doesn't contain, WorldCat doesn't contain articles in journals or chapters/articles in books. And so this does here. So our original search was something like teaching approaches to music, singing, elementary school, something like that. That was my search in WorldCat. And now I'm redoing the same search in RILM. So now I have 87 search results, which is quite a relatively high number. You see here the first, it looks like it's in Czech, or actually it's not in Czech, it's in Croatian. Either way, if you want to limit your search now, then you can go to here on the left side. You can limit your search, and one way to limit is by language. You can choose all the languages you can read. I can read German and English, so I could just check those two. But for the purpose of this search, I will just check English, so that I only want to look at the English language documents. So if I click on one, then of course I have the title. If that sounds interesting to me, I can go to the abstract. I read the abstract, and that if it sounds still good to me that I need the source, I need to make sure to know what document type it is. And in RILM it's up. In WorldCat it was more on the bottom. In RILM it is toward the top of the document. Now this is a doctoral dissertation. It's a dissertation, so if you were to list this in a bibliography, then in your style guide you need to look up how to list a dissertation. It's different from listing a book. So pay attention to this document type, because it tells you how to list it in a bibliography. Then you look it up in your style guide. Anyways, so now I want to actually find this dissertation, a full text of it. And there are several options that I have. There's a different database I will introduce you to a little later, that's called Dissertations and Theses. But here we also have a full text finder. In most of these databases, we have what is called a full text finder. So if there is no direct link to already, actually there is a link here to ProQuest Dissertations and Theses, and we can find it in there. But let's say if it was not here, you could just click on full text finder, and it says no full text found. Now another way is, of course, to grab the title, to open a new window, to open Google, to include quotation marks, and paste it in between the quotation marks, this as the title of the dissertation, and perhaps even after the quotation PDF, because you want to download it. And let's see if this dissertation is available. So this is actually some kind of repository of Oklahoma scholarship, and there is the dissertation in full text, so you could download it, or open it first in your browser and then download the dissertation, which I don't want to do. But remember that doing a Google search with quotation marks, because otherwise you may have too many search results, may actually result in you finding this. But you could, if it shows here check dissertations and theses, it will bring you automatically to the database that's called Dissertations and Theses. And there the dissertation is also in full text, and you can click here on download PDF, and now I have it downloaded onto my computer. So there it is, the dissertation. I'm closing this out, and I'm closing this window again. Let me go to, I'm still in a RILM here. I wanted to remind you of one other thing. Here's actually, this is a journal article. How did I know? Well, first of all, this icon said periodical. That means that this is an article in a periodical. That means in a journal, right? Here, if I say document, if I look at document type, it says article in the periodical. And so this is the title of the article. This is the author of the article. If I scroll further down where it says source, this is the journal title, International Journal of Music Education, volume, issue number, month, year, inclusive page numbers. There you have all the bibliographic information. Let's see if I use the cite function here, if it looks correct. APA looks very good. This actually is correct, but please remember that very often it is not correct, and you may have to make some corrections to that. Let's see if I look at the Chicago style. It is also correct. I would not include this link because this link is only helps for you. I mean, for yourself you can include it, but let's say if you submit a paper or you publish a paper, you would not include this link because somebody else who is not affiliated with Texas State will not be able to use this link. In that case, you could rather say, here, I found this article in RILM, and use and list RILM. I do want to make you aware of one little issue here. First of all, it used an N dash, yet Chicago style said we should use a regular hyphen, and says 127 through 35. Of course, what it means is through 135. And it is best to actually write this out. In APA style, there's a rule to actually say you can omit this first digit, the 100 digit. In possibly in Chicago style, that it may be 2, but it's commonly not done. I would write this out 127 through 135 with a regular hyphen. So there is a little correction that we have to make. And finally, I want to find one chapter that is in a book, not an entire book, but a chapter out of a book. I don't know if I will find one, but I wanted to remind you that if you find a chapter in a book listed in a RILM, it will not include the editor's names and possibly not the complete information of the publisher. That means you need to look up that book in WorldCat or the entire book in RILM, but I recommend looking up the entire book in WorldCat to verify the bibliographic information and to get the names of the editors of that book. So now I don't really find one. There are several books here listed here, but I think there are entire books and not a book chapter like this one. Those of you who are in Kodály music education are maybe very well aware of Louis Choksi. It's very famous, the Kodály method, but this is the entire book document type. It's a book, a monograph, right? And for that, all of the bibliographic information should be here. Anyways, this is a review. This was a review. Tomorrow I will move on to a few other databases that I want you to search. But for now, you know our library catalog, you know WorldCat as a catalog of catalogs, but with the limitations of a library catalog. That means you don't have articles in journals or chapters out of books in the library catalog, or, for example, tracks from a CD. So for that, we use other databases like RILM, right? And since I'm thinking of this, one more word about CDs or even old records, those 33-inch records, or whatever they are called, these big records. They came in a sleeve, And on the back of that record, usually you had liner notes, and those liner notes are very often very useful and very important for music research. So very often I request an interlibrary loan of a record if we don't have it here at Texas State. And in fact, we do have a number of records here. But very often I request one via interlibrary loan, not to listen to the record, but just to get the liner notes from the back of the book. The same with the CD. Now, if you buy a CD on iTunes nowadays, in some cases you have the option to get the liner notes. In other cases, you do not. And for that, it might be very useful to actually order the CD via interlibrary loan just to get the liner notes, because it can be very, very valuable for music research. I wanted to mention that since I was thinking of this right now. Anyways, for today's work, you will just finish reading the musicology article and finish taking notes on it, and you will submit your notes on this. But I didn't want you to forget about these databases, and specifically to always pay attention to document type, so you know exactly what document type you're looking at when we search for secondary sources. Okay, so this is it for today. In fact, it was just a little bit shorter today. I'm sure you will enjoy this. So have fun reading the rest of the musicology article, and I'll see you tomorrow or whenever you have time with the day 5 video. Okay, bye.